Hello, everyone. Welcome to the DePINed podcast. I'm your host, Tom Trowbridge. Thrilled to be here in doing another episode of this podcast. And I'm excited here to have Rich DeVaul, who is founder of XNet. I'm thrilled to have him on and to dig into XNet, which is attacking kind of communications, which is one of the more kind of early DePIN sectors and probably one most ripe for disruption. So I want to dig straight in. And first, Rich, the question I ask everyone to start with is, how do you define DePIN?
Hey, folks, it's really, really great to meet you. And thank you, Tom. Thank you for having me on your show. And gosh, boy, I could say a whole lot about DePIN, but DePIN is really, I think, in putting this in crypto terms, right? DePIN is about solving problems in the real world. So we're trying to tackle a problem that has a direct intersection with some kind of physical sort of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, communications being one of those, by the way. So that would be things like transportation or energy or food or communications. And the list can go on from there, right? So it needs to relate to something physical rather than just purely financial, and needs to be decentralized. So I don't think you necessarily even have to have crypto for something to be decentralized. But of course, crypto is a great set of tools that allows us to build really, really robust and decentralized systems. So I would say DePIN is about decentralized projects, often in the crypto space, which have a business model that centers around meeting some real world sort of physical need for customers.
Listen, that is I think the way you started off, that was a much more high level and intellectual than I think most people attack it. And I go a little more specific. Tell me what you think of this. Crowdsourced physical infrastructure bound together by a common software layer, secured and incented by crypto economics.
I think that's a very concise and specific definition that actually carves out a big chunk of DePIN. So I'm happy with that as a working definition.
Great. Well, listen, you kind of had a more purposeful element to it, which I think is terrific. But let's dig quick first into XNet. Tell us what XNet is.
Sure. So XNet is a crowdsourced connectivity company. Just as Uber disrupted mobility some years ago by being a taxi company that didn't own any of its taxis, XNet is basically a wireless operator, a neutral host wireless operator that doesn't own any of its cell towers. Instead, we actually sell radios and associated equipment to people who will operate those for us. We incentivize those folks with crypto to do those operations, to maintain quality and to serve data. And then we sell this network to mobile network operators, to virtual mobile network operators, and to others who want connectivity. And then we take a fixed chunk of the money they give us and buy that token that we've given our operators and burn it. And that's the flywheel. So that's
right,
what XNet does.
There's a lot to dig into there. So let's can you explain some of that? I mean, I know you've been in telecom for quite a while, but can we get into a little bit more on what that means? You mentioned the word radio, for example. What did that means something different to you versus the
Right.
Average person? So maybe a little bit more of those, unpack that a little bit.
Sure. So let me back up and actually say a little bit more about the real problem that we're solving, and then I'll talk about the radios and stuff. So mobile as an industry is huge. Okay, it's a $300 billion industry just here in the US. And that includes all the companies that basically, provide service to the phone that's in your pocket right now. It's a big, big business. It also hasn't really changed much in the last 30, even 40 years. And mobile networks, when they first started, were just about, we talk about radios, they were just about like analog, almost walkie-talkie like radio links to connect people back to kind of a wired phone network when they wanted to make calls. Well, over the years, that's changed, and it's now become a very data-centric business, right? We think of our phones not so much as a thing to make a phone call, but rather a data conduit that connects us to the internet. Those networks were never really designed very well for that. And even as technology has advanced, the data side has always been kind of a scramble. And now what we see is a data demand curve that's going up like this. So the industry projects that in just like 3 years, there's going to be an actual doubling of the amount of data that you are putting through that network, right? And the big network players, the big industry players here in the US have absolutely no credible plan for how they're going to serve that need. So there's this huge thirst, if you will, for data in these wide area mobile wireless networks. There is this huge demand. And again, operators are scrambling just to serve their existing customers. And so that's the context that XNet comes into. And so what we're doing is we're providing the solution, right? And we're providing that solution by selling carrier-grade equipment. That includes actual cellular radios. These operate in the US in a band called CBRS, or band 48. And they're a lot smaller than traditional cell towers. Traditional cell towers are these great big things that, cost millions of dollars to put in. Technology is advanced. So we have smaller boxes that can comfortably go up on a little mast on your roof. And they don't cost, $50,000, $100,000. Our entry level units actually are more like, $2,000 or so to get you going, right? And those provide an actual long range cellular link, right? That can go out miles if it's in a good location. And that's kind of the anchor, the foundation of our network. But we're also selling carrier grade Wi-Fi access points. And this is the kind of thing you might have seen when you walk into an office building. You've seen a little, like professional looking Wi-Fi access point. These are great because a couple of years ago, changes in the Wi-Fi standard have allowed your phone to use that basically almost as though it's a cellular connection. And more importantly, the mobile network operators have also decided this is a great plan, and they want to use carrier-grade Wi-Fi as a mobile connection because it's much, much less expensive. This gear has cost a fraction even of what those low-cost roof units I was just talking about. So we build a network from these radios, which are a combination of CBRS, these sort of cellular mobile radios, and carrier-grade Wi-Fi access points. And the really important thing is, to you, the phone in your pocket, both of these provide what's effectively a true mobile connection. Your phone will connect automatically as long as the carrier that's connected to your phone wants to play with XNet. And so it just looks like a cellular connection. And then XNet then gets paid for that data. So that's really the critical thing. We provide the service to these network operators, and then we as XNet get paid in fiat for that data. And then we use a chunk of that fiat to buy and burn our token.
Excellent. We're going to get into token economics later. But let's back up for a second and talk about you. And now you've got a rough, high-level understanding of what XNet does. Let's talk about, Rich, how you got here, what your journey is. You founded the company, almost 3 years ago or so?
A couple of years ago, roughly. Yeah, a little more than 2 years ago. So, yeah, gosh, I've been doing stuff in innovation, leadership, and communications for a long time. Highlights of my career include I did my PhD work at the MIT Media Lab. This is like 20 years ago, working on wearables back before anybody knew what a wearable was. I started a company in consumer electronics, got wiped out in the Great Recession of 2008, then took a job at Apple, joining and then ultimately leading a secret research team there called the Technology Advancement Group. And then I ended up jumping ship to Google X in the early days of Google X. So while at Google X, among other things, I started a project called Project Loon, which is actually putting cell towers in the stratosphere. It was an attempt to build this globe-spanning wireless communications network. Incredibly technically ambitious, and guess what? That actually worked. It was really amazing. It actually worked. We provided service in disasters and so forth. I'm really proud of what that team did. Unfortunately, it was not a market success. And the reason it wasn't a market success is we hadn't really thought through how the carriers would view the network that we built. We had built this really as a pure data network, and we didn't really understand. I didn't understand the importance of building something that was specifically designed to plug into the way these mobile operators, these MNOs, think about networks. And mobile networks and data networks actually, it turns out under the hood, for boring reasons we don't need to go into right now, are really different. And you need to make it super, super easy for these incumbents to use your network, because otherwise they don't feel like there's an incentive for them to do so. So my background, includes, stints at Apple and Google, building global scale networks before. And then a little more than a couple of years ago, I was having conversations with folks who turned to be my co-founders. I was consulting on a sort of a Loon-like project at that time. And I said, hey, there's a real opportunity here. We could finally build a crowdsourced connectivity network on the ground that could provide real, carrier grade service, true neutral host service that could be even less expensive, easier to deploy, and more importantly, could actually spread the benefits, the financial benefits of mobile to a much wider group. And it's actually this last piece is kind of, hey, I get to make you a partner in mobile. That is one of the most exciting things to me about XNet versus like these previous centralized, we're going to build this globe spanning communications network project before.
Super interesting. Well, I think you sort of addressed the question, but to be specific, in your background, what I find interesting is a lot of people have had a particular experience that had made them almost uniquely suited to build the current project they're in. And it sounds like the company you referenced that didn't succeed gave you exactly the insights you need to prepare you and arm you to build XNet appropriately. Is that fair?
That's right. So the fact that I got to work at Apple, developing, working on new features and mostly on the hardware side for Apple products, gave me an inside view about what are the best consumer electronics companies, one of the best, say, phone companies in the world, thinks about when they're designing a product and just how that has to work. And that was a wonderful and really important kind of view, kind of from one side of the industry. While at Google X, I got to see how Android was approaching things, right? And then when we started Project Loon, this was an incredible education because we actually built this network and literally put it in the sky, hey, floated it, and then said to the mobile network operators on the ground, we've got this great network, you should pay us for that. And everything worked except really kind of that last piece. And again, because we hadn't really thought it through from their perspective. And that was one of the most important kind of insights that I brought to XNet, because I realized that what we had to do at XNet was we had to build a mobile-first network. We had to start from the perspective of, I'm going to throw out some acronyms here, but the GSMA, this is kind of like this secret society, this cabal that runs global communications. They set all the standards. We had to think about this from building a GSMA 3GPP, which is the kind of current set of standards, mobile network right from the very beginning, meeting their technical specifications, their quality standards, and so forth, such that it could be a no-brainer for our customers who would be these MNOs, these mobile network operators. You've heard the big 3 or 4 in the US are AT&T, T-Mobile, Verizon, Dish, British Telecom, Orange, up in Canada, Rogers, et cetera, right? To make it easy for them to integrate, because if it was anything non-standard, I knew from Loon, they weren't going to pay for it, right? So this background I had of building a great network that was technically amazing, but not quite the right thing, and having that be a problem was one of the critical things that informed how we built XNet from the start as a carrier-grade network from the ground up.
Listen, I think that is enormously powerful insight, because the list of founders who recognize a problem, go off and build a solution without thinking through the actual integration of their potential customers and partners is vast. And I would sort of guess in technology, that's a big, either a minimum a delay, and if not a failure cause, is this realization they've built something, but they're missing the key integration or key kind of compatibility, I guess I would say, with customer technology or need. So that to me is a huge benefit on your side. Can we talk about now, with regard to the carriers, exactly what you're offering them and what they're, it sounds, correct me if I'm wrong, it sounds like you're incenting people to buy and install their own towers, which basically are a data overflow, for lack of a better word, for the carriers that they then will pay for. And by the way, just so people know, we're talking data, we're talking videos, we're talking files, but I'm guessing it's 90% video. Is that right?
nowadays it's becoming more and more video. And by the way, let's not make this abstract. Let me grab one of my little radios here. It's
Great.
actually plugged in and operating. I've got to unplug it here. That's okay. This is kind of our latest product. This is a beautiful little thing made by a company called Alta Labs, based right here in the U.S. This is a 4x4 MIMO Wi-Fi 6 access point. It comes out of the box, ready to go. You basically plug it in, turn it on, and you register it, and you will start offloading data. And this is a really beautiful thing because you don't have to do complicated setup and so forth. You just have to basically, like I said, plug it in the right venue, turn it on, and it will do its thing. So think about how you used to use your phone, right? If you're old like me, back in the old days, we thought of phones as being things that we just made calls on, right? When's the last time you actually made a phone call, right? These are now, as you say, Tom, they're basically, if anything, almost like video terminals, right? We do FaceTime calls. We connect through TikTok. We connect through these video heavy sites, and so video is incredibly hungry for data. That's why we need these, because this device right here can provide multiple gigs of bandwidth to anybody within a few hundred feet, right? And that's a very fast, very inexpensive connection for carriers. Now, a carrier on their own network, right? Their economics are, when they wholesale kind of for themselves, it probably costs them in the US between 25 cents at the low end and 50 cents to serve a gigabyte of data, right? That's their actual costs, right? We can provide, we can actually make money selling connectivity at cheaper than the carriers can actually provide that connectivity themselves. And that's because this equipment is so much cheaper. That's because we're not using licensed spectrum. There's no kind of spectrum tax on that. And so it's incredibly disruptive. And by the way, this is pretty much the only way we are going to be able to add enough capacity to this network to meet the coming future of everybody running around perhaps with Apple's Vision Pro-like interfaces, which are all incredibly video heavy, delivery drones flying around, which are using video to navigate and to process the world and so forth. So we need massive bandwidth, and we're going to get this massive bandwidth through a combination of carrier-grade Wi-Fi, LTE, and 5G connections. And of course, that's what XNet is providing.
I mean, so many questions. So, and the unfortunate thing for the audience is I started off doing telecom and the telecom group of banking. So I know just enough to be dangerous. So this may get a little bit too deep for
Sure.
some people who are not deep in telecom, but help me understand, if you're serving this gigabyte of data, where's that coming from? Is it coming from the fiber into that person's home or building and then fiber to that device, or what's the full path? How does it get there?
That's right. That's a really great question. And also in answering that question, I also want to kind of point out who our typical XNet deployer is, the operators who actually operate this equipment. So we do have folks, perhaps like you, watching at home, who are individuals who just this is really cool. I want to go and deploy a radio. Great. Go to our website, buy something, deploy it. But most of our equipment is actually deployed by ISPs, internet service providers. MSPs, the folks who actually professionally build networks. And there are some other organizations that are just dedicated purely to building out DePIN connectivity. So in many cases, these organizations themselves either are the ones providing the pipe into the venue where this is located, or we have a deal. They have a direct deal with that ISP at scale. Right. So obviously the bits have to come from somewhere. That wired connectivity has to come from somewhere. And for our larger radios, if you put one of our big iron bicells 846 radios on let's say we've got radios like this up in let's say Manhattan and in Houston and in San Francisco and so forth. If those radios are running flat out, we're talking 5 gigabit sustained throughput and so forth, right? So this requires a lot of data, and it absolutely requires a, commercial fiber, internet plan, essentially. You can also do it with fixed wireless, but basically it requires this kind of fixed, bandwidth and really high availability and so forth. And so
is that fiber connected directly to that device, or is it connected to the building and then Wi-Fi or something else?
In some cases, it goes that fiber effectively. Think of that as fiber is effectively directly connected to that device, or it just goes to the building and we've got high-speed copper in the building, and it's actually not connected directly to that big radio. There's a gateway. There's some other stuff, but we don't need to go into those details right here.
Okay.
So now for carrier grade Wi-Fi. We're not talking about, usually we're not talking about, 5 gigabit of throughput. Usually a device like this is most appropriate. This really goes into like a coffee shop. By the way, we don't deploy this at home. I want to state that really, really clearly. No home deployments. This is in my home lab purely for testing purposes, but this is not an operational radio. Let's say you put this into a coffee shop, right? In fact, there's a little coffee shop in San Francisco. I won't name the coffee shop, but they are sort of in the Sunset. Like 15 tops, like a tiny little coffee shop. They're serving, in some cases, 6 or 7 gigabytes of data per day or more, right? And that's just because customers come in, they don't have to pull out their phone and make it, I type in my WAP password or whatever. Their phone automatically connects. They're watching their cat videos. They're drinking their coffee, and it's all good. So in that case, there's probably a few hundred megabits, maybe you're approaching a gigabit at some point, but that's the kind of service that you can get through a kind of conventional Xfinity small business plan. But basically, you need to have some kind of commercial service. We want you to have a business class internet plan. We need to have really 50 gigabit symmetric is kind of the practical minimum for this. We'd much prefer that it was 100, but 50 is fine. And then you're good to go. And then that data goes back through the internet. There's a bunch of stuff that's going to be encrypted and for authentication purposes that gets sent back through something called RADSec that goes all the way back to the carrier. And there's some traffic that then is broken out locally and just hits the internet locally.
And so if we're using that coffee shop as an example, everyone who's using this at that coffee shop is relieving data pressure on the local carrier. And so the local carrier is probably paying you and
Correct.
Saving money potentially by paying you versus loading their towers, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Or they're also not doing Wi-Fi, because Wi-Fi would be the other option. And you may think that local coffee shop could just have a Wi-Fi router, which would also accomplish a similar thing, right?
So that coffee shop does have a Wi-Fi router. So in fact, this coffee shop actually now has 3 separate access points in there. One is a dedicated access point for their point of sale system, which is very common in many commercial venues. You don't realize that there's a separate Wi-Fi system just for the point of sale, but many places that's the case. They have another AP, which is for their free Wi-Fi at so and so coffee, right? Type in the coffee is too hot or whatever the password is, and you get connected, right? That's great. And then there's this third XNet access point there that no one is like typing in a password to connect. It's just if you walk in and your phone has a subscription with one of our carrier partners, the phone automatically connects. And that's a huge benefit to that carrier. Now, of course, if people had just intentionally connected to the coffee shop's Wi-Fi, that carrier in some senses is benefiting, because that means that phone temporarily has this data connection, right? But people have to intend to do that. And most people who go through there don't. They don't think about it, right? People walking by on the street, if they pause outside, their phone connects, right? So this is a thing that is much more automatic. And it's basically universal unless you have disabled Wi-Fi on your phone, or unless you have a higher priority network in your networks list of networks to connect to on your phone. Your phone is going to connect to this network, assuming that it has service from one of our supported carriers, right?
And what's the range of that? Like, how many do you need to cover whatever zone you're talking about?
Right. So a rule of thumb is if you have like a small bar, restaurant, whatever, this device, which we sell for less than $200, is good to go, right? One of these. Slightly larger, maybe we'd say a couple of these. right? Right now we're rewarding folks with 50 XNet per gigabyte. And I'm not going to talk about the price of our token, but let's just say this is a pretty generous deal right now, especially because we're giving you 2,000 XNet once you connect this in an appropriate location as a bonus. This is our kind of sort of entry level, still enterprise quality, but entry level and expensive solution. And then for when we talk about like a stadium, or an airport, or some other very kind of high density venue. We also offer folks units from Ruckus, which is a maker of commercial gear, sort of enterprise gear that costs about 5 times as much, but also has effectively 5 times the capacity. So we can support
because you'd really want to be in like stadiums, or
yes,
that's where the carriers would really want you, because that's where the data spikes are huge, I'm guessing.
That's right. So the carriers would love us to be in stadiums, and we are in discussions specifically around stadiums, and I'm not going to talk about those right now, but the thing is, the carriers want us everywhere, and this is the thing that I think it's not obvious. People pull out their phone and it says you've got 3 or 4 bars, so this is great. You make a call. You don't think about kind of the strain that's on the network. There are places, especially in like Manhattan or some other dense urban areas, where you can pull out your phone, on a major carrier network. It says it's got 4 or 5 bars, and you try to hit a website or, God help you, do a video call, and basically you've got nothing. And you've got signal strength, but the problem is there's so many devices trying to suck data through that connection. There's just no capacity left. Right. So increasingly in dense urban areas, carriers are being challenged by capacity because their networks were never designed for the level of demand that we have right now. This is why Wi-Fi is so important. It is a lot less expensive for the carriers than their mobile networks, just because their mobile networks require licensed spectrum and a lot higher power and more expensive equipment. But those mobile networks are really necessary for being out on the street, being in your car, right? All those places that Wi-Fi is not going to reach. And they really want to free up capacity for those critical cases because they want you to be able to make a call everywhere you go. They will pay for Wi-Fi almost anywhere there is a commercial foot traffic, because that Wi-Fi frees up this limited capacity, more expensive channel to be used when it really, really matters. When someone's going down the street and there's a car crash, you need to be able to call 911, right? That's incredibly important. And they want spare capacity on that network to do those really critical things. And they will absolutely pay us pretty good money for that Wi-Fi offload, because it frees up that super valuable limited spectrum for the LTE network.
So let's talk about the token economics, which you referred to, because that I think is so important in DePIN projects, and obviously yours where you're crowdsourcing infrastructure. So $200 to buy one of those, $2,000 to buy the more rooftop installed kind of mini tower, for lack of a better word, radio, and then walk through the whole ecosystem. You're rewarded something. The carriers pay you. How's the split work? Like how does that whole ecosystem work?
Yeah, so let me focus on Wi-Fi to start with, because it's really simple, and it's also going to point out sort of the future state of our sort of LTE rooftop radios as well. So when you buy the XP6 Pro, this little device through XNet, and you register it and turn it on. So first of all, it costs about $200. We deliver it within a couple of weeks. 4 weeks is the outside edge of that, but we've been hitting 2-week deliveries pretty reliably these days. Once you put it into, again, a commercial venue, it's not a home venue, put it into a commercial location and turn it on, and data starts to flow, we're going to reward you every epoch, which next at epoch is 2 weeks. We're going to reward you 50 XNet per gigabyte that you have served through your device. And we'll give you the accounting of that, and then you get those rewards. Now, our token is on the Polygon network, and it's launched, it's live, it's been traded for a while. You can find it on CoinGecko, you can find it in MetaMask. It's there. And so every 2 weeks, you're going to get an airdrop of tokens that represent the data that you serve through this device. your first epoch, you will also potentially get that bonus for turning it on in an appropriate location. Now, so that's how the tokens go out. The carriers are paying us on a monthly basis because they don't know what an epoch is, and that's fine. They largely don't know what crypto is, although we do have some carriers that are crypto savvy. And so they pay us in fiat for that data. We've negotiated deals through an aggregator that give us, I'm not going to give you the exact number, but it's not bad. It's certainly I'll just say it is more than 10 cents and actually considerably more than 10 cents per gigabyte from the carrier. So that money comes in, and with Wi-Fi right now, we take 80% of that money the carrier hands us, 80% of that, and we use that to buy our token off the markets and burn it. And what that does, of course, is that creates the buy-side pressure on our token, pushing up on the price. But think of this as a kind of revenue share, right? So if you just mine your tokens,
it's like a stock buyback, effectively. It's a share buyback, effectively.
Except, of course, our token is not a security; it's a utility token, which is incredibly important. Yes,
no,
but conceptually, that's right. So imagine that like at some point, once our network has scaled to its equilibrium size, and we've got all these carrier deals and so forth. It might be very similar just to taking, imagine that I'm going to say Orange, the telco, Orange gives me $100 for some data. And imagine I give out $80 to all the operators who serve that data, right? So kind of like at the scaling limit, it would be very similar to that. But here's the deal, right? Right now, our network is growing really quickly. We're adding new partners, new customers, new folks who want to buy data. So if you sell your tokens now, of course, you're going to get the market value now. If you hold on to your tokens and you believe in the future of XNet, then those tokens are actually going to be claimed potentially on some of that future revenue as well. So our tokens are a utility token. They incentivize operators to run our network. Think of this as being a crypto miner. But it's a crypto miner that doesn't just convert electricity into heat and hashes as it does in Bitcoin. And by the way, I think Bitcoin's proof of work is awesome. This is a crypto miner that converts, a much smaller amount of electricity into actual useful wireless connectivity that we get paid for, and then we get to redistribute that payment to our operators.
But on the ecosystem, the question I'm thinking about is how these rewards, you mentioned the words 50, you mentioned 80%, two critical numbers.
Yep.
How are those determined? How can they change? Who determines if they're changed and how they're changed? Because you can imagine a token price going up 10x and or 100x, you're still giving 50 away. Different economic model, right?
That's right.
Like, so how do you deal with how does this all happen?
Right. So it's funny that you mentioned that, because let's just say our token has kind of dramatically appreciated in price recently, and that initial 2000 XNet, when we first started offering it, was maybe like $100 of incentive. And now it's actually at market price, it's actually more than the $200 that we're selling that unit for. So clearly there's some challenges there, right? And so we have a process where we work with our community, and people can put forward ZIPs, XNet improvement proposals, right? That we then discuss and hash out. I think our next governance meeting is on Friday. And then there's a voting process, and the voting process is based on right now, who holds XNet, that we basically, it's XNet-based voting power. And right now there's a relatively small number of big professional deployers who actually have the majority of the voting power. This is not a situation that we think is perfect. And in fact, later this summer, we're planning on launching the XNet Foundation. That foundation is going to take over the governance of the token through a DAO voting process. At that point, we're also going to be issuing non-transferable governance tokens to people who we think are awesome, who have supported the community, and that will also be allow for voting. And those governance tokens will actually have a lot of voting power. So we want to make sure it's not just like the big operators and the whales who get to decide how the network works. But yeah, so basically we have a proposal right now that is going to refactor emissions looking at a 30-day volume-weighted average for the price of our token, and try to make that a little bit more rational. And by the way, it's super important that we do this, right? It's super important that we both work with the community to figure this out, because the community, you are who is going to benefit from all this. And secondly, that we make the rewards rational, because if we incentivize the wrong things in the wrong ways, we're going to get a network that doesn't make any sense. Like if I just pay out a whole bunch of XNet simply for turning a radio on once, then that's not really incentivizing you to go deploy and operate that radio in a good location for a long period of time. So this is really, really important, and it's going to be an ongoing conversation as our network grows, as people try different gaming attacks, as the value of our token changes. So we need to build something that's robust to all of these things, and we're going to have to it's going to have to live and grow along with the network.
Well, listen, get it. I mean, one thing just to share what we did at Fluence, and Fluence is an incredibly different project. We have compute providers who are paid for offering compute. Yeah. And we have a reward of Fluence token, but denominated in dollars. Yeah. So it's $10 per core per month, and that is reset daily, at max 10% based on Oracle, the price of Fluence, of FLT, right? So it shifts. And the idea is, but people always worry about, okay, price goes down, people go out of business. You don't want that. But you hit the real problem, which is price moons, and then people have no interest for us in serving useful compute. Correct. You keeping it going. HiveMapper, I don't know if you saw, they just had an issue where they had to stop people from driving just going out to map because it didn't work for their network. Yeah, and the coin price went up so high, people were just driving to earn, which is not what they wanted. Right. So this price spike is an issue that I think everyone think, oh, it's a good problem to have, but it actually can impair the actual use of the network. And Filecoin had this problem also. Correct.
So one of the things I've often said to aspiring entrepreneurs is you've got to plan on success. And that's actually much harder than many people think, because it's very easy to think about, okay, here's my current set of problems and we're scrappy and we're this and we're that and we're doing it. And that's great. But what happens when you get traction? And honestly, I, who've given this advice many times, you must plan on success, was not anticipating the sudden rapid appreciation in our token value that happened recently. Some community members basically turned on a liquidity pool on Ethereum, and it was a substantial pool. And goodness knows, it turns out that markets like liquidity, and so our token price ran up really fast. And great problem to have. And at the same time, this is the kind of thing that can destroy a project, because what we don't want is for people to see this as a speculative asset, right? This is not a meme coin, right? This is something where the value needs to flow from actually solving a real world problem. That's what DePIN is all about. Just as Fluence is all about, right? You want to provide connectivity. We want to provide actual, you want to provide compute. We want to provide actual connectivity, and that network has to be high quality, right? So we can't sell a network that's just people turning on, kind of BS radios in random locations. So the incentives actually have to drive the behavior we want. And as we have found, the only real way to do that is to actually have prices and input. Now, I don't like that, because oracles can be, have their own set of problems, but it turns out that it's a better set of problems to have, because that's something you can technically address, than to have the kind of open loop, we set an incentive, now people drive it to an irrational point, and now you can't control what the network is doing.
And to phrase it another way, for this network to really be deflationary, correct me if I'm wrong, you mentioned 50 XNet per gigabyte?
Yes. So
and that means you're 80%, you're paid 10 cents, which means 8 cents has to buy back more than 50 XNet in order for it to be deflationary. And that assumes full capacity of every node functioning.
Right. So this is the kind of thing where back of the envelope estimates are sort of awkward, because it's not too hard to imagine how this works once we've kind of reached the scaling limit and everything settles into an equilibrium. But we're very much at a non-equilibrium point in our system, right? We're at a non-equilibrium point in a highly nonlinear system, where it's, where the future is actually having an effect on present behavior, and of course, people speculating about the future perhaps is having an effect on present behavior. So it's really complicated, right? But the goal right now is to say to folks, look, it will never be easier. It will never be easier to mine XNet in the future than it is right now, right? We will never in general. I mean, sure, there might be some short-term fluctuations because of price, but in general, as we emit more XNet, we're going to be factoring down our rate of emissions. This is something that we've described, right? So if you are interested in the project, and you think XNet has a future, boy, you should jump in now because we want to make sure that our early folks, the folks who get in early, have an opportunity to be rewarded in a way that our later folks won't. Just like if you started mining Bitcoin,
that's what you want.
In 2012, it was pretty easy, right. And that's back when 10,000 Bitcoin bought 2 Domino's pizzas, right? So obviously, with every halving, it gets harder and harder to mine Bitcoin, and that's the system working as intended. As the XNet network scales, it's going where the rewards are going to factor down and down, and so that's again the system working as intended to incentivize folks to get in early, help to drive the growth of the network. But it does mean that right now, our economics kind of are sort of making an assumption of folks holding the token and wanting a token because the rate of burning right now isn't keeping up with the rate of emissions. At the same time, the value of the token is high and seems to be sustaining. So we think that it's rational right now given the demand for the token.
Fair enough. And that 80%, is that going to be set by the foundation as well? Is that the foundation will govern that as well? Okay, got it. Because you could also see a time of scale where, good problem to have, where 20% is like a big number. And that is actually excessive for the foundation to keep. Sure. We're not obviously not there now, but again, thinking in the future, it could be a big number. So,
but here's the thing, right? The economics of running a mobile network are actually pretty tough. So looking at the big operators here in the US, they spend about 40% of their operating budget just on their RAN, the radio access network, right? So it's not cheap to actually deploy, operate, finance, and so forth, maintain those radios. Our bigger radios, right? We haven't really talked about this much, but those rooftop radios, the more kind of the bigger assets, we think those are actually ultimately going to be the most valuable because while I can sell our Wi-Fi offload for tens of cents, in some cases, we're probably going to get dollars for those gigabytes, especially for foreign roamers coming onto our network and so forth. So that equipment is more expensive, but it's to operate, but it's also ultimately going to be very, very high value. And the revenue split there, it was 40%. We're going to move that to 50%. But that's still rational because there's a lot of costs. Like it's actually quite expensive just to run the AWS services for a telco core, right? Similarly on the Wi-Fi side, the 20% that we're not burning, that's not just like free money. We have real costs in running the infrastructure for that Wi-Fi network. Now they're lower, as it turns out, significantly lower than the cost for the CBRS network. And again, I could talk about data transit fees and cores and all that stuff. Right. But we do have real costs. We have to run a RADSec proxy and blah blah blah. So that's not gravy. There ultimately can be a little bit of profit in there for XNet Inc., which is operating that network. XNet Inc. has to make money. But it's really this is really basically we're trying to be as generous as we can with the people who actually deploy and run our radios while not having the company that's backing all of this kind of go out of business. The foundation itself is not going to actually see any of that that split. The foundation is going to have a pile of tokens that it gets when it's set up, and it's going to basically benefit from the appreciation of those tokens as treasury, assuming they do appreciate, and just from the overall value of the network. So.
Excellent. Well, you mentioned carriers are your customers. That's also a terrifically simple part of your project versus most DePIN projects. Most DePIN projects get massive capacity and massive kind of supply, and have to fight for the demand. A lot are still waiting for the demand. The awesome thing about your project, there's only one other one I know like this. You have like, 3 or 4 customers per country, maybe 1 in some countries, right? Potentially. And in the US, maybe you have 3 or 4 and you have a huge success with just 1 customer. That is incredibly unusual and very cool.
Yeah. So to be clear, I mean, there's like, I am not kind of, my DNA isn't around consumer sales. Like B2C is not really in my DNA because it's just where I've done my kind of career. So I'm much more comfortable with B2B, right? Business to business sales. And so I know something about how to negotiate these kind of enterprise deals. I'm working with folks who also have that as their background. And there are basically 4 big players, here in the US, as I said. There's AT&T, there's Verizon, there's T-Mobile, and now there's Dish, right? But there's also, and this is a really important customer category for us, there's a whole bunch of MVNOs, and people might have heard of like Boost or Mint or MobileX, right? And these MVNOs, all they do basically is they have a brand.
It's a mobile virtual network, right?
It's a mobile virtual network, and these folks don't actually own a network. Right? They have to buy their connectivity wholesale for one of these big network providers typically, right? But that means they're paying even more per gigabyte. And they're also competing on cost, which is a really tough thing to do. So one of the great opportunities that we have is to make deals with these MVNOs, because they're not paying 25 or 50 cents a gig for the data they're getting. They're probably paying $1, right? So if we can sell them basically an alternative to their primary host network, and we can provide good enough coverage and good enough capacity such that their customers are significantly offloading onto XNet, we are a massive win for them in terms of economics. And so we expect to have more and more customers in that sector. We are discussing deals with actually a couple MVNOs right now, and we think that
customers now. Are you any deals signed up?
So one of the things that I can't do is to talk about, so you have to actually look at our official announcements for deals, completed deals. But I will say that we are in active negotiations with a couple of MVNOs, and that may be all you ever hear me say. You may never hear me announce the deal. You just might notice that, traffic is now being offloaded to the XNet network. We're in a space where actually, it's an important thing to point out to our listeners. This is an old school industry where people, generally speaking, don't talk about deals. And, like the communications business. And of course, in crypto, we're shilling everything and talking about how awesome everything is and all the deals we're going to get. I actually have to straddle both of those worlds. So you're going to hear me say very, very little about actual deals closed, even when we have those deals signed, right? In some cases, I'm never going to mention it. Maybe you'll notice that the traffic is offloading on devices, and other people can talk about it. But that's kind of the nature of the biz that I'm in.
Let me ask the question 2 different ways then. Is there revenue on the network now?
Yes.
Fine. Yeah. So that means you have to have a deal in order for there to be revenue.
So right now we are on the offload side. We're working with an aggregator, right? And that aggregator has deals with a whole bunch of folks. Right.
Fine.
I will say also that we are standing up our capabilities to do direct, and that's a technical capability that is in progress.
And that's going to be higher margin and more profitable. And then next question, help us understand scale, right? So how towers, and we're talking, I imagine you're focused on the US, but this is equally applicable everywhere, obviously.
Yes.
So help me understand scale in the US. Do you think about this by city, by state, by carrier? Do you think of it in terms of thousands of spots and radios, like tens of thousands? Like, help me understand the scale.
Yeah. So this is one of the most exciting aspects of this project. And scale is different for CBRS. That's the thing I keep talking about. Think of that as like our quote unquote old school LTE cell network versus Wi-Fi. It would be, if we wanted to cover comprehensively the US just with CBRS, right? If we wanted to provide connectivity that, like in theory, an operator like AT&T would provide, we wouldn't need thousands, tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of radios. We might need like 1 million radios across the US to cover everywhere, right? that's just like simple, like, you can kind of do a calculation based on the area on a map that our radio can cover and how big the US is and blah, blah, blah. And actually, it still wouldn't cover the whole US. There'd still be big areas that are uncovered, but they're just very, very few people there, right? Now, on the Wi-Fi side, our coverage zones are much, much smaller, right? We're talking about coffee shops and so forth. So at the limit, just in the US, our CBRS network, which currently has a couple hundred radios on it, right? That can certainly scale to, thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of radios easily without us ever running out of good locations. And by the way, we're very strategic about where we let people turn those on. We work with carrier grade data to identify gaps in coverage and capacity, and then we turn on hexes, incentivizing hexes just in those locations, right? So we're very careful about the incentives for those because there's the big radios, they're more expensive and so forth. With Wi-Fi, we say, put this anywhere you've got customers, anywhere you have, people congregating, it's non-residential, you can turn this on. And we could have millions of Wi-Fi locations in the US alone. But we're not stopping there. We're going international. We just announced Canada, and we're planning on having other locations as well. And by the way, the international stuff is just Wi-Fi right now, but there is an insane demand for data all over the world. And so we could very easily see a network in a few years that has, potentially, millions of devices on it, and being able to work with suppliers who can scale like that is actually one of the challenges. So this is as much a supply chain and logistics management as it is anything else. And that's why I'm super picky about this. I come from a consumer electronics background. I know how hard it is to make stuff and ship stuff. So on the Wi-Fi side, we're never going to work with a single supplier, right? We always have multiple suppliers that can cover us. Same thing on the CBRS side. So on CBRS, we're working with radios from Blink and Bicells, two great companies. On the Wi-Fi side, right now, we're supporting radios from Alta Labs, from Ruckus. We're probably going to be turning on some more vendors. And by the way, the other kind of cool thing about both of us, and we haven't touched on this, but there are existing deployments of private LTE radios here in the US and existing deployments of carrier grade Wi-Fi. So think like a university that has tons of super high quality Wi-Fi. We can convert those as a brownfield conversion and turn them into XNet offload just with a configuration change. And by the way, we're already doing that. So there are ISPs that have come to us. We're in discussions with universities and others to actually do this conversion. And that way we can rapidly expand our network without people having to buy any more equipment. It has to be the right equipment, right? It has to meet certain criteria. But that's one of the ways that we can win because, I do make a little bit of money on every radio that we sell because I'm never going to sell something we lose money on. But our business model is around selling the network, right? And the fact that we can scale that network without us having to sell or fulfill additional hardware means that we can scale almost in a SaaS-like way rather than a conventional consumer electronics way. And
right. I mean, that's the promise of DePIN is a crowd-funded network. If you're talking about, you mentioned $1 million, that's $200 million worth of CapEx required, right?
Yeah.
That you would pay none of.
We would pay none of. We have well over $1 million, probably closer to $2 million worth of CapEx on our network right now. And XNet has directly paid for, I don't know, a couple, maybe $10,000 or $20,000 worth of that, and it's all test gear, right? So that's the really amazing thing. And this is the promise of DePIN, right? Because we're both able to leverage the capital of others, and we're able to redistribute the benefits to others. So the reason I'm here doing this thing is because I spent a bunch of time in Fortune 10 world and helped incredibly rich, in some cases, kind of evil people get that much richer, right? And don't get me wrong, I believed in what I was doing, and I think the products were great, and I don't regret that. But I think the next version, if you will, the next version of capitalism that I want to support is about building projects that actually drive value back to communities, right? That where the community can be a source of investment, and also the community can be a place where the value flows back to. And I think if we do that, then ultimately, we're going to have a much more vibrant and much more sustainable future than right now, where, by the way, AT&T, I think AT&T is a great company. They're just typical. I saw their results recently. They've got 60% gross margins. Right?
Crazy, big.
Which is great for them, but where does that money flow back to? It flows back to AT&T shareholders, and not everybody's an AT&T shareholder, but anybody could help out with a project like XNet, right?
And let's just get, because you basically hit on your ambition here, which is, how big can this be? And so if we think about the US, you're effectively, the goal here is to crowdsource an alternative or another basically data network. And if you think about it even bigger, it's crowdfunding and building and connecting a global data network.
Yes,
right.
That's right. And not just data. I mean, we've been talking about data, but this is also mobile. So our ambition is to provide a true, I'll use some acronyms here, but 3GPP roaming network for LTE and 5G, which means the same class of network that the big boys provide, right? And also the best, wireless data network. When we're talking about really critical infrastructure, connectivity is considered a human right at this point. It's absolutely essential to economic development. And we think the best way to build this is to have you as small businesses, individuals, and big companies also contributing and building this out together. And then it becomes a resource that is collectively kind of owned and operated, and where the value can then flow back to that group. And as you say, it can be global, right? So we think of this as I think of this as being the right way to build the next generation of infrastructure, not just in communications, but also power. Like, honestly, there's so many cool things you can do with renewable energy and DePIN, right? You can do this with transportation. I've already heard about really cool kind of ride sharing alternative projects based in DePIN, right? There's just so many beautiful things that we can do that make everything both more efficient, more robust, and return value back to the community, rather than kind of centralizing value in the hands of a small number of people in Silicon Valley.
Super interesting. Well, listen, that is, it's a very ambitious effort, but I got to ask, one question, the obvious question. You got obviously the first movers in the sort of DePIN telecom space is Helium.
Yep.
It seems to me Helium is doing a very different thing. They're very much focused on Wi-Fi connectivity with Wi-Fi routers and offloading onto carriers. And so do you view them as complementary, as competitive, as, how do you sort of situate yourselves in them?
So Helium is an inspiration. Obviously, we wouldn't be here without them as pioneers. But at this point, Helium is really focused on, they are an MVNO for T-Mobile, right? The way Helium is really making their money right now is by selling phone plans direct to consumers. And the way they control their costs is by offloading data onto Wi-Fi, right? So they are in a tough business, and don't get me wrong, mad props to them for taking on the whole MVNO thing. But it is historically a very difficult business to make money in. And in some sense, they are their own customer, right? When they deploy a wireless network, it's benefiting them by reducing their overall costs and whatever they're paying T-Mobile. Our model really is very different. We're building a neutral host network. We're very happy to work with T-Mobile. We're happy to work with AT&T and Dish and Verizon
and Helium.
If Helium wants to use our network for offload, I'm here to make a deal. Amir, give me a call. Because we don't want to play favorites. We just want to build connectivity, right? So ultimately, I think that we may be heading towards a future where there are, we'll call them kind of wholesale connectivity providers. XNet is going to be one of those. XNet already is one of those, right? We provide neutral host connectivity to anybody who wants it. And we're going to have awesome consumer-facing brands, MVNOs, who sell that connectivity. And we're going to have a relatively small number of kind of legacy MNO, consumer-facing MNOs, who are, by the way, probably making the majority of their money through this wholesale business, but still maintain some kind of customer-facing presence. But even then, we're actually starting to see right now MNOs starting to basically transfer their customer-facing operations into effectively what is an MVNO, whose job it is simply to go and get those customers, retain those customers, provide great customer service. And then the core of the MNO, that kind of wholesale network, is just being focused on optimizing its costs and so forth, right? And I think that is the future. And so I think, like Helium seems to be going more in that, MVNO direction, which again, I think that's great. But I think that, we can help them control their costs, right? We can help them. We'll help anyone who wants to control their costs by building the best, least expensive, highest quality network to provide that connectivity.
Yeah, and listen, that's where Helium is now. I mean, that's also because I believe the IoT network is just taking probably just longer to get going. But that's, they've obviously a global network. But outside of Helium, any other DePIN projects you particularly like or pay attention to or enjoy?
So again, I'm mostly focused on my own business. So I'm not trying to leave anybody out here. But we see others who are doing a very similar thing. So there's a group called Carrier One. They're actually based in Canada. They also come from a real mobile network operator background, and they're building something that is in many ways it's very similar to XNet in terms of spirit. And I think that's awesome. It's going to be a long time before we could have 5 more projects like this before they bump into each other in the market. Right now, we're all helping each other grow the market. There's a project called Really in Austin, which is another MVNO that also has some offload. They seem to be doing kind of a sort of a Helium-like play, and the list goes on. Like I've heard of some things that are still kind of in the pre-launch phase, but again, we have fantastic projects. We have like Hive Mapper and Demo. We have and in many ways, and I don't want to oversell this, but in a certain sense, I would almost consider Bitcoin as also being a DePIN project. And I can explain why I'm going to make that argument in just a little bit. But I think the future is really going to be centered around kind of almost these sort of physically oriented projects, because again, this connects to the real world in a way where you can really see the value. Or in the case of Bitcoin, what secures, the most valuable crypto network in the world is a huge investment in money and equipment and power, right? And it's actually, in some sense, that physical inflow of resources, which is what makes the Bitcoin network so incredibly difficult to attack. Like in order to do a 51% attack on the Bitcoin network, I would not only have to have more money than God, I would also have to have, like terawatts of power in order to actually launch that attack. And it's that physical dimension to Bitcoin that many people don't think about that I think is actually one of the things that makes it such a robust and secure thing.
Well, listen, hard to argue with the last point, but if you put Bitcoin and you're effectively putting block production in DePIN category, then every L1 fits into that as well.
Every L1 that's secured by proof of work could go into that category, right?
Yeah, but why would you limit it to proof of work? Because you still need hardware to do proof of stake.
That's true. I just think that the physical resource requirements for proof of stake are substantially lower. And again, I'm not talking about proof of stake. I actually think that figuring out ways to do robust, secure, decentralized consensus that don't put a huge physical resource demand on the network and on the world, that's actually a really important thing. I'm incredibly impressed by Ethereum pulling off the proof of stake transition. I mean, oh my God, talk about, like changing out the engine on the airplane while it's flying. That was one of the most amazing things I've ever seen. And so again, I'm bullish on both proof of work and proof of stake and other kinds of non-energy or non-physically intensive consensus processes. I just think that it's important to understand that there is, I think, a space for these processes, especially, as you see, the Bitcoin network is actually shifting more and more towards renewables because that just happens to be the cheapest form of power on the planet right now.
Understood. Totally agreed. Yeah. Well, except that just, on terms of other projects, you got that question wrong because the right answer is Fluence, a decentralized compute network. So we're going to have to have you back on the podcast so you can answer that question right. We're going to start all over again.
No, Tom. Like I said, I've been so focused on my corner of things, but you're right. And by the way, I think we can also legitimately mention Filecoin because although we don't think of
sure.
Yeah, definitely. Because Filecoin is about basically, I used to say spinning disks, but Filecoin is about storage, which is this resource, just like compute, which is this resource. It's very, very physical, and it requires physical inputs of energy and space 100%. and all that. So I think any project 100%. Like Fluence, like the amazing Fluence project, that is about providing a real world, infrastructure and power and space, and someone's attention intensive, solution at some level is a DePIN project. Where I think it gets fuzzy is like, there's fintech, there's DeFi stuff that probably has these inputs as well. But I do think that those projects are in a slightly different category because really it's about, how they structure their product, and it's really should be abstracted from whatever the underlying network or compute layer is.
Last question. Bitcoin, you're a Bitcoin fan. Bitcoin
Yes.
Price prediction, end of 2024. How do you answer that?
Well, I think we're going to see a substantial run up in price. So I don't know what I don't know what it's going to be like at the very end of the year, but I wouldn't be surprised if we weren't north of 150.
Yep, listen,
50K.
totally agree. Makes sense. I think that the convexity is what people don't get. It. One little aside for you is there's discussion of the state of Wisconsin Investment Board buying into Bitcoin, and they have 150 million bucks. And someone made the point, pensions are always the last. That's a bearish signal. I'm like, listen, but the difference here is that they can actually make that a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Correct.
Enough pensions buy it, and it's the only asset which doesn't scale, right? So they literally could drive the price up if they actually thought about it and did it.
So this is something that I think many people haven't thought through, which is that, this pension managers, the folks who actually manage assets for these great big funds, they're the most conservative. They're the last into basically anything, but these are the biggest pools of capital on the planet, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they're always looking for new asset classes. They can't go out and do crazy speculative things, but as soon as, there's an ETF on something, they can start to consider it. Mm-hmm. And over time, like if you just assume that like BlackRock shifts like 3% or 5% of its capital, into, let's say, Bitcoin spot ETF, that's an insane market moving event.
Yep.
And just for the sake of hedging, like this is almost an inevitability at this point. So
and it becomes a self-fulfilling
prophecy. Yes.
Boom. Exactly.
Yes.
Well, listen, we agree on a lot. We're gonna have you back on and see how these things played out. But listen, appreciate the time. How do people find you? How do they follow you? How do they get involved? What do you want to share with people?
Yeah. So probably the best thing to do is to essentially set up a link tree or some other, comprehensive set of links. But you can find me on X as R DeVaul. You can find my amazing project, which is, XNet Mobile on X. And if you go there, you'll find links to our Discord, which is probably the very best place to hang out. And if you go to xnet.company, which is that slightly awkward URL, you will find our main project page, which also includes a link to our shop, where you, of course, can find our stuff, and you can jump in and you can start mining our tokens. So anyway, basically, short version is find me on Twitter. You'll find links to everything else from there. And then please join our Discord, jump in. There's a whole lot more to say about this project, and we'd love to have your help.
Excellent. Listen, thank you very much for being on, Rich. Fascinating, fabulous project that, if it doesn't do it, someone else is going to win exactly in this space. There'll be a lot of winners, and you've clearly got the experience to do it. So thrilled to have you on and part of this DePIN ecosystem. Thanks again.
Thanks, Tom. Super appreciative for you hosting. Thank you so much.
Welcome.